pandemic got us into a reflective space and made us look inward to see what we can do for the world at large. As a self-expression coach, I became a catalyst for women and started Vani, a one-on-one coaching program for women on finding their voice, to speak up, to be visible. As a storyteller, I spotted there were many ordinary people amongst us leading extraordinary lives, making a difference to the world, and they needed to be heard. Thus was born You and I with Rashmi Shetty, where amazing personal journeys with their uniqueness and individuality are showcased, a reaffirmation of the fact, open your eyes wider, the world is far more beautiful when we acknowledge the presence of both you and I. Our guest today is Janet M. Harvey, a best-selling author of the award-winning leadership and coaching book, Invite Change, Lessons from 2020, the Year of No Return. She is the CEO of Invite Change, a coaching and human development organization that shapes a world where people love their life's work. As a visionary leader in the global professional coaching industry, Janet Harvey is an International Coaching Federation Master Certified Coach and an accredited educator who has engaged adults, teams, and global enterprises for nearly 30 years to invite change that sustains well-being and excellence. As Janet shares, coaching in its many forms has at its root effect of awakening consciousness and doing so in a highly accelerated fashion that sustains. Janet Harvey uses her executive and entrepreneurial experience to cultivate leaders in sustainable excellence through generative wholeness, a signature generative coaching and learning process. Audiences regard her as a vanguard human being, provocative, love it that her wedding dress was a mini in purple silk and she arrived at the ceremony on a Harley in style. Listen in as the articulate and compassionate Janet Harvey shares her journey and her love for innovation in coaching as she reveals how being human from within is a choice. Janet, for me, this is a fangirl moment. I love the work you do. I love the way you hold yourself, whether in coaching conversations or in coaching webinars, the way you include everyone and just make it so easy and seamless without having to meet us in person. There is something very powerful about your presence. Welcome to You and I with Rashmi Shetty.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I feel very seen by your intro. Thank you.
Janet, you have always come across to me as somebody who's very calm, in control, and never out there to prove a point. What was little Janet like to the Janet Harvey that the world knows you today as?
I was a bundle. I am the last of 4 children. I have 3 older brothers, and I'm not so sure mine was an intentional birth. And the truth is, I came out with a pretty full plate of abundance. I was verbal at 6 months, full sentences, conversing with adults at 2 years old, and my godmother said that I was a fey child, and I sort of knew what it meant, but not exactly. It wasn't until much later in my life when I started to really look at some of the Irish lore that I began to understand that this was a blessing and a curse both. And this was true for me. I was always a little too alert, a little too smart, a little too capable, and I didn't understand why that was hard for people. I had a lot of friends. I was in sports. I played the guitar, I played the flute, I played the trumpet. I was On the debate team. I was in student governments. I mean, it's like it was easy, effortless. And it took a little while for me to realize that because I could, I was assuming everybody else could too. And that was actually what was separating me. And I think that it was a really painful awakening in my young adult years to realize, oh, it wasn't so much be humble to be small, but I never needed to have anybody know what I was capable of. In fact, one of the things I learned to do in work was do my work. And, I didn't need it to be showcased or validated in any way. In fact, when people would find out how much I was doing, they were like, oh my God, that's like so beyond the pale. And please don't hold anybody else to that expectation. And I said, when have you ever heard me do that? I don't do that. So the fact that I can and I choose to give my life force in that way is never an expectation of anybody else. I want them to choose and give their life force in the way that's right for them. And so it was this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. There's this wonderful pin in the theater, thespians, they're called. And the pin has, my mother gave it to me when I was about 4, I think. It has comedy and tragedy, right? So there's a laughing image. It's silver with some, I don't know, cheap rhinestones or something on it. And then the other one is a sad, tragic face. And, that's life. Life has lightness and humor, and life has suffering and tragedy. And we are neither one of those. Those are experiences that we are so much larger than and have the opportunity to put in context at every stage of our lives. And I just feel gifted and blessed in ways that I can't even begin to fully articulate in words. It's more of a sense or a felt understanding of my life, and it continues to unfold in ways that always surprise and delight me.
Wow. Now, I think the easier question would be, what could you not do, Janet, growing up?
What can I not do? Fit in. I just did it. And cheerleading. I was terrible. Oh my God. I was a competitive figure skater as a youngster, and graceful and wonderful on the ice, a total klutz on land. I could never get the beat right. I was always either a step ahead or a step behind. Classic, right?
Okay, seems good you're human then.
Exactly.
So there were things you could not do. But going back to your school and college, apart from being an all-rounder, what did studies mean to you? What did you move on studying as a student in school, and then when you specialized in college? How did your journey as a student?
Interesting. So my next older brother was super smart, but hated school. And I was a freshman in high school when he was a senior. So he was a sophomore, I guess, when I was in middle school. I did all his homework and I wrote all his papers. My brother would not ever have graduated if I hadn't done his schoolwork for him. So high school was a breeze for me. I loved it. I took Latin all 4 years. I was on the school newspaper, was on the yearbook committee, loved history, loved philosophy, loved art appreciation, loved English. I mean, I loved everything. Calculus was awesome. I didn't like geometry, but calculus I loved. And everybody said, oh, you should really go be a doctor. And I had no idea what I wanted to be. In fact, I think that's the silliest question that we ask high schoolers, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? We're just not anywhere ready to answer that question. And I ended up moving from the middle of the United States, St. Louis, Missouri, to Los Angeles. My father had gotten a transfer at the end of my junior year of high school. And when I went to go register for class for my final year, the principal looked at me and he said, I've reviewed your transcript a couple of times because I can't believe how much work you've already done. You've already exceeded the credits necessary to graduate in the state of California. You need to take California state history because that's a requirement, but otherwise you don't really need to enroll. I'm like, oh, okay. So I went to the junior college and enrolled, and I started applying to university. And because everybody said I should be a doctor, that's what I did. I applied as pre-med, and I was accepted to UC Santa Barbara. And boy, this was a rude awakening. That was a party school. That's what everybody did. And I was a straight A student going, you guys are really weird. I was carrying a ridiculous load of classes, and I hit an obstacle. I went from being a, A+ student all my educational years to physics. It wasn't organic chem that got me, it was physics. In the lab, I was getting an A. Totally understood it. And this is when I first got that my body was actually smarter than my head. And I'd sit in class, he would write on the board, he never talked, and he never had office hours. I couldn't figure out what the heck we were doing. And I basically got an F on the midterm and said, I'm out of here. And I did. I quit school, much to my parents' chagrin. And I tootled off to Europe for a couple of months with a family friend who was from Sweden. So I spent time there in Denmark and Norway and Finland. And when I got back, my dad said, well, you need to get a job. I'm like, okay. And his company was hiring. So I moved to San Francisco, where I lived for 20 years and was magnificent. It was really lovely to be there. And I realized that I wasn't really meant to be only mental, that I could feel that there was something else that was more valuable to me. And I ended up enrolling in economics. So I have a bachelor's in economics and a second bachelor's in finance because I couldn't decide. The practical side of me said I'll get a job with finance, but I'm going to love economics. So I did them both.
So when you shifted from science to economics and finance, did it seem
Yeah,
the right thing for you to do at that point?
it did at that point because it helped me understand the world. I'm a systems thinker. I see, in fact, every project, I need to get my bearings with the overview. And once I have that, I can take the elevator down to the roots of the grass very quickly and figure out how things work, and then come right back up and pitch it to somebody. Right? That's that way of seeing holistically that is a natural for me, and that's what economics is, right? So I think about the whole globe. I'm always paying attention to the news to see what's actually going on each of the continents right now. What are the trends that are happening? What is it influencing in the general society? How am I seeing it show up in different industries? I think like that all the time. I know that might sound a little weird, but it's the same way in my family. Like, how are all the interconnections happening? And I think that what I found was a home for my overachieving mind. I could be with philosophy and systems thinking and macro and micro and kind of analyzing it in a way that was more intuitive than finance. Finance was very pragmatic. And I knew I was not going to be an accountant. I was not going in that direction. But I did end up working in financial services for about 15 years and still do a lot of work in that industry.
Janet, a question here, hypothetical.
Uh-huh.
If you had not scored that F in physics and you'd managed a B, let's say, or a B plus in physics, would you have continued science because you're a good student? Or would you have still
Yes.
taken that break?
Yes. At that point, I still had good student going on in my head. Yes.
Okay.
And I'd already figured out how to not associate with the partying crowd. And I was working as a coach, a sports coach for youngsters in figure skating. So I had a very rich life outside of my school life. And I was like, yeah, okay, fine. You guys can do whatever you want to do. I probably would have stayed a little longer, but I think I would have at some point realized that the path of school for another 12 years was not going to be not my journey. I've had this recurring pattern that I get it deeply immersed into something, and when I lift my head up from it, I'm like, enough, done, and I'm on to the next thing. And I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about the past. In fact, when people have me on podcasts like this conversation we're having, I'm like, okay, let me see, what did I do? Because that's so last week.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm much more attuned now to what happens spontaneously now and what I see emerging from me as the path forward. And that's a fun rhythm. Yeah, it's being
Yes.
in that unknown space all the time and getting really comfortable with it.
Yes, that's so true. And it really syncs well with economics because that's what it is in a space of unrest, constantly moving. And I think that's how your connect with economics is so powerful. And
Yeah.
when it comes to coaching, you are one of those most popular coaches that we have in our coaching circle. How did coaching enter your life?
So I was at the time, I think I was at year 12-ish, somewhere in there, in my career at Charles Schwab and Company. And our chairman, Charles Schwab, we refer to him as Chuck. And we had gone through the crash, the financial crash in 1987. That was brutal. 1989, the company was in a good position and we went public. That's a journey inside of a company. And shortly after that, he called a bunch of us into the boardroom and said, I've made a very important decision. I'm going to ask our 6,000 people in our branch offices to transform themselves from customer service to selling, and I want them to sell financial planning. I think the room was quiet for a full 2 minutes. Everybody was like, wait a minute. You launched the industry called discount brokerage to make sure there was never a conflict of interest, and you hired all these people with the promise they'd never have to sell. And now you want us to go do this change project? Well, that was me. And that was kind of the story of my career, that I always ended up with these projects nobody else wanted to do because I thought they were interesting. I loved the challenge of them. And again, comedy and tragedy. I was the person people love to hate, right? Deep respect, and found me challenging to work with, not because I wasn't a good teamer or a good leader. I was both of them. But I expected a lot, right? We had high stakes projects we were working on. It's like, don't come on this project if you're not all in. So, I learned about a lot about what not to do and how to calibrate the intensity of the work we're doing. So I'm thinking about this project and I'm talking with my team and we're looking at our toolbox going, we ain't got nothing here that's going to rise to the complexity of this. And I narrowed it down to two problems we needed to solve. One was to level the power dynamic, get some harmony so that a senior vice president who's thinking about long-term value of the organization could sit shoulder to shoulder with a branch office receptionist who's thinking about what happens to the customer when I walk in the front door, that the two of them could have a co-creative, collaborative, creative destruction kind of conversation. There were lots of things that didn't work about the way our branches were. So this was a natural evolution. But sometimes it's hard to admit when this thing you love isn't working. And we needed them to have that quality of conversation to reimagine the customer experience through the lens of selling. It was a very challenging thing to find and design a solution for. And the second piece was, I knew we were going to have a ton of resistance to this. I had people say to me, does Chuck know you're doing this project? Like, he gave it to me. There was just huge disbelief in the system. And so that was the second problem we needed to solve. The way we approached this project needed to be highly inclusive and leave plenty of room for people to process their fear and uncertainty about whether they would survive on the other side. We had a pretty tight timeline, not a whole lot of budget, and a big retention goal. 85% of the workforce is what we were going for. We were under budget, finished early, and we saved 96% of the workforce, even with 40% of those people moving from the location where their branch was to a regional call center, a city for some of them that was a couple of 100 miles away.
Mm.
And what did we do? We did what I can look in the rearview mirror and see was a team coaching approach. So I started coaching working one-to-many and not working one-to-one. I tend to do that sometimes a little, I call it bass backwards. So it was great. And I stuck around for a couple more years to finish, implementation and getting it all sorted through our talent systems. But I walked into my boss's office and said, you know what? I think I'm done. I really want to go be an entrepreneur. And this works so well. I want to go do this in other companies and see if I can replicate the success. And I left the organization in 96 and I've never looked back. I've been an entrepreneur ever since.
No, one sec. When you tried this, today we call it team coaching. At that time, what did you use to understand that this would work with the people?
We were working with, so appreciative inquiry was understood. We were working with dialogue processes from David Bohm. We were really trying to structure the interaction space, helping them to do more original thinking. So we did behavioral event interviewing of they had to apply to be part of the pilots. And that meant they had to keep running the branch office the way it was and also participate in the pilot. And, that's brain scrambling. So we were doing a fair amount of kind of more traditional facilitation just to get the data collected about the current environment. But then we really turned them loose. We did a lot of creativity exercises. We gave them sentence starters. We gave them all kinds of open-ended questions that they had to do their own personal reflection on and then share with, long before liberating structures came out, we were doing, pair share. And so pair, quad to quad, 8 to 8, full plenary, just deepening all of the time. We used graphic recorders and we built, I wrote the first guide on teaming agreements in 1994. How do you behaviorally get along, right?
From economics and finance, where did facilitation and all of this come into your life? Were you reading a lot on this parallelly or part of any training program? How did all this
yeah, I did a few training classes, but it wasn't natural for me. What I realized is that I could see pattern very easily, and I trusted my intuition, and I was not afraid to ask bold, cheeky questions. I still ask bold, cheeky questions as a coach. So for me, it felt more in flow than traditional structured. And I've had to learn. I had a boss ask me one time, do you know that people find you incredibly smart and it scares them? And I kind of looked at him and smiled and I said, can I let you in on a secret? He said, sure. I said, I'm highly intuitive. I figure things out extremely quickly, but I know that you and others need to see it in a concrete sequential way. So once I've arrived on what I think the best right answer is, and there's always more than one, but I come up with the one that I think is the best right answer. And then I go and do the data research to help you understand that it is the best right answer. So you'll say yes, and we can get going. He just roared laughing. I'm not sure he believed me, but it is how I've operated. And so for me, being in that one-to-many space, encouraging more discovery and the confidence to express oneself, no matter what the power dynamics were in the room, these were the things that came easy for me. I could hold that space and encourage people to, if you were the bossy SVP, to settle a little bit, leave a little more room, make it possible to have some wonder as you're listening to someone who is a subordinate that you think doesn't know anything. You might just be surprised. And those were just conversations, right? They weren't formal coaching assignments. But the relationship was based in that sense of everybody has resourcefulness. They may not be using it, but they have it. Let's go figure out how we create the environment. And to me, this is the definition of leadership, creating the conditions in the environment for people to enthusiastically accept responsibility for the role they've been given authority to fulfill. That's it, full stop. And unfortunately, that's not what a lot of leaders do. They get promoted based on their technical acumen, and they forget that it's through people that things get done. And I know they get it here. I'm talking about forgetting it in their heart and in their body. So the actions are often way too far out ahead, and they don't bring people along, and they wonder why they get terrible 360 feedback.
But it's a very difficult journey inward, especially when you are climbing the leadership ladder. You're lonely at the top, definitely. Many people don't like you, or they love to hate you because you have to take some really bold decisions. So that journey with the self, the conversations with the self become very important. How do you coach oneself to do those conversations? Because that's what shifts the way you think and the way you look at the world. So how do you do that?
Well, first, it's important to say I don't subscribe to the belief that it's hard.
Okay.
I think we've built a myth that the path of consciousness requires surrender and suffering, both of which are a choice. I think the path to consciousness is joyous when we learn the skill of reflection, and we don't teach that anywhere. We have a lot more MBA programs, for example, that are beginning to move more into direct personal experience, simulation kinds of activities, and then personal reflection, then get feedback, more personal reflection, do it again. It's starting to emerge as a more well-informed adult learning pedagogy, and I think that's fantastic. But when I was growing up, it was read the HBR case study and debate it. Like, wait a minute. I remember saying to our head of marketing one day, do you realize how futile chasing best practices are? And he kind of looked at me funny, goes, but that's what we always do. I said, I know. Here's the problem. It's history. It's rear view mirror perspective. It's also out of context. Even if you're talking to a company that's a competitor in our industry, we don't have their culture. We don't have their people. We don't have their customers. Why would we want to know what their best practices are to try to replicate them? Well, we're not going to replicate them. I said, really? Here's the last 3 product launches that were done based on best practice research. That's not innovation, that's copycatting. And it's not going to fit. And notice we're not producing the results we want on either of those launches.
Yeah.
He didn't change his habit. Now, here was my mistake. I just named it. I didn't help him build his own noticing that there was something not quite working in the approach we were using to develop the research to support a product coming to market and then how we would launch it. We hadn't done the reflection work. So, I hit my head against the wall a number of times like this. I started to realize, this thing I do in my personal life, and I've kept a journal since I was a teenager, mostly because I kept having this experience of not fitting in. I don't belong. I'm out of time or space with my peers. And I would be writing about this. Like, I'd had this experience and this is what I saw happen. And here's how people were behaving in response to me. And that's not quite what I want. So let me experiment with something else. So I came to it out of as a strategy for me to figure out how to be in relationship with people without this feeling in my intuition that they were just, I don't know, accommodating me. Maybe that was the way to say it. And when I finally discovered coaching, I did my first training with Julio Olala and at Newfield Network. And I just felt like I'd come home. I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I've been doing all of my life. And it is so foundational in the development of a coach. And it is so foundational in the development of a leader. And I've had leaders that will only give it 5 minutes. I'm like, great, 5 minutes is a great place to start. So when you come to the session, make sure that you're prepared to declare what the learning insight has been from your reflection. And it's usually by about session 4 or 5, they're reflecting every day for 5 minutes. And they're reporting things like, oh my God, I avoided a major meltdown in this one team because I took a little time over my coffee to think a little more carefully about how they'd been set up and the reason they were in a little bit of what I call sandpaper moments. And then they would say, what else have you got in your tool bag around reflection? And we'd start to put some other more sophisticated processes in. One that I work with now, I call tensions of presence, and inviting people to recognize the things that are in tension with each other. For example, inside of an organization, apathy and inspiration.
Yeah.
And, sometimes you want a little apathy. I was one of those leaders did not want to put in the operating side of the house because I was going to break it. Because I'm an innovator. That's my nature. And there is a time when being an innovator and inspired to do new things is too risky. It's too aggressive, and it will cause a collapse. So the question is, what's the right ratio of these two things? When I was first looking at this, I thought, apathy is the thing you want to get rid of so you have more inspired people. That's not right. That's dualistic thinking. That holistic thinking says, can I be in the tension just a little bit longer? And then really examine in reflection what's going on in the system. What are my habits? What am I looking at here that looks familiar? And my first response is to do X. It's not working. What are my preferences? What are my assumptions? What are the biases that I can see that are operating in me and in others? And that time spent really fleshing out how they are seeing the system of the project, the team, the division, the department, the whole company, the industry, it doesn't matter. All of those are fair game. Now they're going to not make the mistake of rearview mirror action. They're going to see current time and go, I want to produce this kind of a result. That means these are the things that need to shift. Now they can make that pitch to their teams and help them to understand the rationale in a very pragmatic way, not in a rah-rah cheerleading way. Yes, charisma is a fine thing to have, but if it has no substance underneath it, when the teams start to work, they won't succeed. So reflection skill, critical.
Yes, and you spoke about surrendering of the consciousness as well. So when we have surrendering on one hand, does it go hand in hand with innovation? Because you're having a goal, you want to achieve this. So that means somewhere you want to have control, but surrendering is giving up that control. So how do all of them get together in this space?
Sovereignty isn't giving up control. So let's define sovereignty together. When I first wrote the definition about 15 years ago, relevant to coaching, right, and being personally sovereign and delivering coaching in a professionally sovereign way, I was thinking about the ability to be within oneself, independent and in charge of our choice. And I realized that that's a little bit mental, right? It feels a little harsh to me. And I realized that to me, the only person I can be accountable to is me. Nobody can hold me accountable if I'm not actually internally recognizing that I'm accepting responsibility for an inner authority. My boss can tell me that I have a budget of $1 million to spend, but it's still up to me interiorly to do the reflection and the hard thinking about what's the best way to deploy that $1 million. That's an inner authority. So sovereignty is self-ruling, self, reign, ruling. And when I accept responsibility for the inner authority to choose how I relate to the conditions of my life, it doesn't matter what's going on out there. I actually can see it more clearly. I can remember the values that I care about. I can make decisions that have integrity to those values. And I can have some agility now because I'm not trying to protect myself. I'm not trying to promote myself. I'm not overly ambitious so that somebody else loses so I can win. That all falls away because I'm not defined by that relationship. I have accepted the responsibility for the inner authority of choosing how I relate. To me, this is the way out of a lot of the politics and drama that shows up in organizations. And that's a personal development journey for every person.
And a small question before we move to the next important question. The small question is your deep study of Latin the reason why words are so important to you?
Okay, well, the truth be told, I think I had a crush on the instructor who was teaching Latin, and he also taught archaeology, and I really thought I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was in high school. So no, I don't think that has anything to do with it. I just found actually.
No, because most of the words in English have a Latin origin or a Greek
Yeah.
origin. And
Yeah.
your ability to look at words very differently is what astounded me when I was listening to your webinars and I saw your TED Talk, where you gave such a beautiful, positive pivot to a word like judgment, which is normally seen as a negative trait. So, how did that come about?
Well, of course, some of it is that I have been on the receiving end of a lot of judgmental behavior or judgment-fueled behavior, right? Because they were feeling judgmental in some way in relationship to me. And of course, I could see this happening for others as well. And, I don't know that it's so much that I redefine judgment. I think what I was inviting people to remember is that at its root, judgment is about discernment. And we have a neurobiology that's predisposed to safety. So that's going to provoke judgment. This is the negative sides. Like, it's not safe. This person's not safe. This situation is not safe. This project, this career, whatever, fill in the blank. And it starts I always have the image of a tumbleweed in my mind's eye. It starts a tumbleweed rolling, and we build this whole story. It's a hypothesis that's false because we haven't actually asked the bloody question, what's true here? And we're encouraged not to disclose our doubts and fears and uncertainties. So we've built a societal structure that says, if you can't say a nice thing, don't say anything at all. Or if you can't contribute to the conversation, then hold your voice. Yeah. And then people say, but I'm not getting promoted. I'm not finding the love of my life. I'm not being invited to be on this project team. Well, how would they know to invite you? You're not visible. So this is a very difficult dismantling of a mindset. And that's really what got me talking about judgment, is that I realized, oh, this is coming out of the mindset. So I define mindset as our frame of reference, our attitude, our thoughts, our beliefs, our values, our guiding principles, our habits, our routine actions, rich basket of elements. And they often operate unconsciously, as I was saying previously, right? We're raised in order to behave in this way, and it influences how we show up, how we interact with other people, and how we make decisions. Oh, well, that's life. I think mindset might be very important. And I've asked people to respond to the question, what is mindset? And people will get one or two of that list of 7 elements, but they won't get all of them, and they don't understand the cause and effect relationship. So then we do some exercises for them to do a little bit of go reflect and go down memory lane on the last great experience and the last horrible experience. Whatever it was, it doesn't matter. All of them will work. And then people start to realize, oh, that's my autopilot. That's right. What are we talking about? Consciousness. Now that's a big old fancy word, and people think, oh, that's just a little, I really abhor this phrase, woo-woo. Stop it. We need to stop saying that about the personal development aspect of being a human being, because without it, we're not ever going to tap into the full potential of who we are. We need to see the value of introspection and the sharing of that introspection with others so that relationships have wholeness as a possibility. Without sharing the fullness of who we are, wholeness doesn't happen in the collective. And ultimately, that's what's required. So judgment becomes a mindset. And for many people, they will have a laundry list of things that they're afraid of. That's kind of the easy first doorway into judgment. And the antidote is to get curious. Is my fear real? Zig Ziglar always, he's a big sales guru. And I heard this at a conference somewhere in the mid-70s, false evidence appearing real. And I just burst out laughing. I thought, oh my gosh, that is exactly right. We manufacture an intensely emotional experience that has not yet happened. When you get a no in a response to a request we've made, will you choose to work with me as your coach for the next 6 months so that you can achieve the growth you're looking for? And the client says no, most coaches shrink back. Well, no is the beginning of not yet. Right? It's in that moment that we ask the next question. What do you want strong enough that you're willing to risk moving through what's familiar and comfortable to you? Oh, because of course, that's what happens in a coaching relationship. So you may not be available just yet for that level of stretch. What would be 10% back that would be useful for you right now? I'm going to stay in the conversation as coach. So that's just a simple example that we move through the fear because we begin to see it's not real. It's not our reality. It's a story or a myth that has been manufactured for us by whatever our cultural orientation and societal orientation is. Not right, not wrong, not anything that we want to evaluate. We want to notice it and avoid naming it as something. Oh, there's a phenomenon here. Goodness gracious. This is why I don't like models. You've heard me talk about that before. I think people hide behind models, right? They want a prescription or a formula. I'm much more interested in looking at the phenomenon. What is occurring right in front of me? What's happening in this relationship? And to get curious about that, not accept that I intuitively am right. My intuition guides me to my curiosity. And I think another step out from curiosity is wonder.
Yes.
How do we live in a state of wonder, which is so much more vibrant, right? It has a life force of its own, and it allows both parties to realize neither one of us know where we're going. Like our conversation today, it's going to go wherever it goes because you and I are sitting here doing it. It's so fun, right? We can take ourselves lightly and take the subject seriously.
True. Because I think that is where, for me, the 3 words you used, saying notice, name, and negotiate, come into place. Because when you are currently in the moment and you're just being, that's when you can notice it. Otherwise, it can easily slip off. And when you notice it, that's when naming it becomes important. It was so powerful, Janet. Because as coaches, we are told, we are trained, be non-judgmental in your listening. And at that time, it was like, okay, yes, so being judgmental is negative. So that's why we are told, be non-judgmental. And here you are, who comes in with so many years of coaching behind you and changes the entire way we look at judgment. And that, for me, was my aha about looking at you differently. And the way you approach, like you said, another thing, everyone talks about having a model. What is the model that you think will fit in here? And you come in and say, no model. And getting into the consciousness, the human within, is something which is really beautiful. And that's what happened in the pandemic. there was a huge disruption everywhere, everywhere,
Yep.
world over. Nobody thought the world would come to its knees in front of
Right.
something so small, which was
Exactly.
invisible. And nature thrived, human beings completely arrested themselves into their homes. A lot of reflections today, the perils of losing them, because slowly life has gone back to what it was. What were your reflections from the pandemic? Because I loved what you wrote on disruption. But what are your reflections from the pandemic?
Things have not gone back to the way it was. 2020 was a really interesting year for me. In the summer of 19, we had just finished a huge project, a multi-million-dollar project that we did for a big multinational on all 6 continents. And I said to the team, I think it's time to pursue one of my dreams. It's a dream I've been holding for a decade, and maybe, just maybe, now's the right time. And that was to host a social progress conference that would bring foundation funders, grant funder kind of people in the room with practitioners all along the human development spectrum, and the folks who would be implementing. So not just the activists, but folks that were involved in social progress initiatives in an NPO or an NGO, or maybe private people who were wanting to do things at the point of population served. And to talk about climate, to talk about racism, to talk about healthy communities, and to talk about human slavery. These are huge obstacles to us moving into a new direction. So great passion around this. So we said, yeah, let's do it. March 8th, I am in a photography and video studio in downtown Seattle, filming some promotion videos and having some new photographs shot of me for the promotion for the conference. And the next day, Washington shut down. And I'm thinking to myself, holy Toledo, what are we doing? We have this commitment. We have 50 speakers who all have, paid contracts we're going to execute with them. Will anybody come? Will we even be able to hold it? And ultimately, we ended up doing the conference virtually, which was grand. But boy, this was an extraordinary practice in staying still and staying connected to what I cared about and helping the team keep their feet underneath them. We came through the pandemic swimmingly well. I'm blessed to have a team of people who have faith, which was, there were days when it tested our faith. And in July, the beginning of July, our head of promotion said, Janet, you've had a book in you for a really long time. What do you think? Could you get it written this summer so we could have it for the conference? I'm like, are you kidding? He goes, well, I kind of already did something. We've cleared your calendar for the next 4 weeks. So I sat down and wrote a book that's called Invite Change, the year of lessons from 2020, the year of no return. Because I could see, back to the conversation we were having about economics, I could see that the system had revealed its cracks. The pandemic was simply a catalyst. It was always there. The cracks were always there. But now it was in plain view for everyone to see. We would not go back to the old way of structuring systems, enterprises, companies, organizations of any kind. And boy, aren't we struggling. There are a lot of leaders who have been long tenured in the seat who want desperately for things to go back the way they were. And you read the social media and the periodicals, and everybody's going, how do you do hybrid? And it's like, hang on, everybody, take a little breath. What's the upside? All the cracks that we all knew about of command and control and hierarchical systems is not how nature operates. Look at the disease. Look what it did. Look how it replicated. It basically told us we are social connection beings. It told us that. Now, we didn't like the way it told us that, but it got revealed. We do want to be together. But technology's also turned us into a zero geography world. And the larger generation in the workplace in another 5 years will be under the age of 30. They're all digital natives. They will not tolerate the very structured way in which business has happened for the last 100 years, right? We're at a pivotal turning point moment in the world, everywhere in the world. And I think that the pandemic was an accelerant to help us recognize time to use our ingenuity to see what it is to produce work. What are we actually creating? And what has been around for a very long time, but nobody seems to practice, is a social mindset that is taking into consideration what will be the downstream influences of this on people I don't know, cannot see, but are always going to have the ripple effect of this decision we're about to make. I can tell you that I spend a lot of time with executive teams who don't embody that practice. And if they did, they'd have a lot less angst, a lot less front of the Wall Street Journal risk that occurs because they've not thought through the ripple effect of their decisions enough. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen to some degree, but it's usually driven by what does the board want, what do shareholders want, what do key stakeholders want, not so much on the impact and influence side. And I think they underestimate just how powerful their work is in the world.
This is so true. Very, very true. And I know you don't go back into the past, but over the years, and especially the last 3.5, 4 years, all the reflection that came to you together, if you give it a thought, what were some of the most amazing moments in your journey so far? And what are some of those moments that make you smile and move forward?
In the first year, when things were locked down, it was the quiet. It was the quiet. I could better hear the water lapping on the shore. I live on an island. I could better hear all of the species of birds who were far more vocal and present. The skies were cleaner. And there were so many moments to be still and to sit in nature. And this was very restorative to me. And as a result, I spent most of 2020 doing webinars with coaches all over the world to help them stay grounded, to, resilience, unfortunately, has become a bit of a baseball bat, be resilient. It's not how it works. But to provide a moment of pause on a regular basis. And I built a small deck and I shared it widely around the globe and said, when 3 people are gathered, sit, be in relationship with each other, take time to be still and quiet, and remember you are whole no matter what's going on out there. And you might be limited in the way you can be connected, but there is no reason to not be connected. You mentioned earlier about experiencing a great deal of intimacy when you're on the internet with me. Well, this is how you do it. Be in presence with each other. And these are, it's another level of skill to recognize the hunger, the deep desire inside of every human being to be connected in that way. And this was a joy for me, for sure. 21 was a year when everybody thought it was going to come back together, and it didn't. That was challenging for folks. And 22, then we had an eruption in all parts of the world. There are lots of things going on in governments and in armies, right? And when the war broke out between Ukraine and Russia, that was the time to reach out to coaches again and say, remember your wholeness, take care of yourselves, make sure you allow room for it. It is as important as the time you spend working with your clients. And it was such a joy. The Russian coaches couldn't organize themselves anymore, but boy, they were together and they were committed to moving forward. The Ukrainian coaches were together. They were together with their Russian coach colleagues. I watched the coaching community really come together in a it's just giving me goosebumps to even say it, in a really important way of deep respect for our humanity, no matter what was going on in the world.
Mm.
And I think that maybe the most important thing that's come out on the other side, because I am writing a second book this year, is that how important it is that we remember our practices. They're human practices. Coaching didn't invent them. Meditation and mindfulness practices has been around, last extinction. we can go back and look at what the archaeologists and anthropologists are learning about mankind before this incarnation, and recognize the value of silence, the value of community, the value of love, and how important it is to come back home to it over and over and over again. And this is what I think has manifest from the pandemic years.
Yeah, yeah, so beautifully put together. Because I think when we are talking about leadership, a lot of them became vulnerable, they became real, and suddenly relationships were far more clearer as far as the vulnerability quotient, the authenticity quotient came into being, and leaders started being more human. And
Yes.
I think that is something that the pandemic shifted in most of the senior leadership spaces, which made it beautiful for a lot of younger people coming in who may not have met the team in person. Now, that is where the entire shift on mental health and well-being also came into question, because now it became open conversation about it. Not that it didn't exist before, but people now accepted it as conversation pointers as well. Another area that, Janet, you're in is the tree planting project of yours. Did that also spring in the pandemic?
It did, but I don't think it had anything to do with the pandemic, really. The Climate Coaching Alliance started to form in the fall of 2019, and we did our first 24-hour webinar-a-thon.
Yeah.
You might remember that. Yeah. And Silvia Tassarati, who is an MCC coach in Rome, Italy, and I had served on the foundation for a number of years. We've stayed really good friends. We both ended up serving on the Thought Leadership Institute for a couple of years. And when she rotated off, she called me and said, I want to do something. Like you haven't been doing something? Just, no, I really want to do something, I think, for the planet. And, we're having a cup of coffee together and just kind of riffing a little bit in our conversation. And I said, let's do something simple, tangible, easy, and fun. Because if it doesn't hit those four, neither one of us are going to make room in our very busy, full lives to bring one more thing into the world, right? It takes something to stand up a movement. And so the more we talked, the more we said, maybe what we ought to do is tap into something that's already started and see if the deployment of coaching to this thing could push it over the tipping point. Could we break through the inertia that a lot of people have around climate? And that's when Coach for Planet was born. And we're, continuing to promote people getting involved in their communities, planting trees, having conversations with people about climate, helping to open their thinking, going to a state of wonder, all the things that you and I adore about the coaching practice. And what we're looking at right now is where the gaps are in organizations that are trying to implement ESG goals, environmental, social, and governance goals.
Yeah.
And that this is a leadership challenge.
Yes.
A mindset shift for leaders to have that social mindset and recognize that if you just make goals and report on them, you are not in integrity. And the workforce that's coming towards you now will know it, and you won't keep them. So that leadership challenge requires a little bit of transparency. That it needs to be fleshed out and spoken about. So we're working on a research project right now to interview leaders who are engaged in ESG and to see if we can suss out where the gap is, that if they had support in this way, that would help them be more successful. So stay tuned.
Definitely, we'll stay tuned. And as we are leaving this conversation, 3 life lessons, Janet, from you that you consider very important.
One's mindset is a choice, moment to moment. My husband laughs all the time because he's not a morning person and I am. I wake up smiling and laughing, and he just shakes his head like, I don't know how you do that. I have always done that, right? So that doesn't mean everybody can inherit that, and it's a choice. The mindset we choose in relationship to something is always a choice. I think this is key. And the other is to remember that there's always more to the story. Whatever story we got going on in our head or in the conversation we're having with someone, if we can catch it, that we're, going down a road with a hypothesis that we haven't tested, and pause and say, I wonder what else is going on here, right? And that's the naming through curiosity, as opposed to what our intuition or gut says is going on. And then negotiate life through love. At the end of the day, it's why we're here as humans, as best as we can sort it. And all of our fear and the anger that often is the source of expressing our fear is to protect the thing we hold most dear, which is the love of life, ours and others, that we care about. And when we come back to love, we drop the need to be violent to each other, emotionally, verbally, mentally, spiritually, physically. And this to me is the lifelong journey for all of us. I just came back from a music festival in New Orleans that's been running since 1970. There were 500,000 people there. It was amazing to see how much joy. Nobody was fighting. There were no arguments. There was no yelling. All races, all ages. It was extraordinary. And I thought to myself, if music can do this, where else could we bring the expressive arts, the essence expression that happens through the expressive arts into conversations that are stuck and stalemated right now and unable to come back to our common humanity? That's the value of love.
That's so true. That's so true. Hopefully, this powerful, very small little word, which sometimes vanishes completely from our everyday mundane routine, love, remains, thrives, and helps us evolve. Because I think someone like you has moved from a human being to being human. And with your work, that's something you constantly remind us of as well. Thank you so very much, Janet. Honored to have had this conversation with you on You and I with Rashmi Shetty. Stay blessed, continue to inspire, and now waiting for your second book.
Thank you. Sending you big hugs across the pond.
Likewise, Janet. Thank you so much. With that, we come to the end of this weekly quest of You and I with Rashmi Shetty. Do let us know if you know people who make the world beautiful. Write in to rashmi.thethirdeye@gmail.com. That is rashmi.thhirdeye@gmail.com. Come. Let's explore this amazing world together, both you and I.